o'clock, and we will start our Board of Commissioners special meeting. I want to convene it for the June the 20th at 5 p.m. and recognize John Shutak, Engineering Division Director, to lead us through.
Thank you. Chairman Wright, Vice Chairman Williams, members of the board, thank you for the time this evening. I'm going to be talking about the short water line extension program and some updates to our scoring and cost share criteria. So just as a quick overview, just going to touch on the program goals and objectives, kind of what we learned from the FY22 program and the data we got from that, and how that's informing the recommended changes for FY23. I want to show you what that does as far as score and cost share impacts to the FY23 program, talk about the timeline a little bit, and then I'll just wrap up with the couple of actions that we have for you all to take tonight. So the goals and objectives, these are pretty simple, really twofold. We're just trying to address public health issues and ensure that we're doing it in a fiscally responsible manner. So in order to do that, as part of the FY22 program, or reshaping of the short line program, we came up with these scoring criteria, and they're really focused on those two areas. So you've got water quality and quantity information, which is 60% of the scoring metric, and then you've got 40% of the scoring metric that's really concentrated on those economic factors, or making sure that we do this in an economically responsible fashion. So looking at things like customer density, cost per applicant, participation rate, making sure that we hit some of those metrics and reward projects that are have higher participation rates and have a lower cost associated with them, or have the potential to earn more customers in the future based on the number of parcels that are available. So looking at what we received as part of the FY22 program, we kind of learned what didn't work. Right? We got 124 total projects, and out of that, we only had 17% of those projects that had water quality testing information available. Less than 1% had yield information available, so somebody with a low producing well. Our average participation rate was 10%, and just for reference, our historical rate of participation for the short line program is about a third. Our average customers per mile were average 23. Average cost per applicant was over $200,000, and the average score out of 100 was 22. So why did all that happen? Well, if you look at it graphically, this kind of tells the story. You had about 3/4 of the projects scored below that average of 22, with a quarter above. So so we had low scores, and we had score compression. So as you can see, we had three scores, 11, 16, and 21, that comprised 75% of the projects. Why'd this happen? Because we didn't get well testing information. We just didn't get it. So that took roughly 60% of the scoring right off the table. Wasn't available, so that drove that average score way down. We also had that low participation rate out of the economic factors. And low potential for low customer density. So if you recall, the average was 23. The average for the Union County system is 49, so we were well below that. So looking at the individual metrics here, the major contaminants, you see the big block on the left, we got 117 out of 124 projects had no information. For minor contaminants, 112 out of 124 had no information. For well yield, 123 out of 124 had no information. So we had fairly good distribution when looking at customer density, or customers per mile. Again, the cost per applicant, 121 out of 124 projects received the lowest number of points you could. And then the participation rate, again, you had 94 out of 124 that earned 0 points. So that told us we needed to do something, right? The scoring criteria and the approach that we took, it just didn't work for FY22. And I think it's pretty evident, where the numbers shook out. But overall, that rubric supports the goals. So we want to focus on water quality, we want to focus on well yield, and we want to focus on those economic factors. So the changes that we're making are relatively minor within the overall structure. So the modifications that we're proposing are, one, we require well testing as part of the program. This will help inform roughly 60% of the scoring that's available. Excuse me. Across water quality and water quantity, we also want to adjust those scoring ranges. So in addition to requiring well testing, we want to adjust how those points are distributed. And on the economic factors, so participation, if whatever participation you attain, we want to multiply that by the available points rather than having different categories. That way you earn what you earn. Customer density and cost per applicant, again, we just want to adjust those scoring ranges to better reflect kind of what fits what we saw from FY22. And the system benefit, which was the last economic factor, there's no change to that. That's a binary decision. It either has a benefit or it doesn't. So pretty straightforward on that one. So here highlighted in red are the categories that are going to change. So 6 out of 7 we have proposed changes. But overall, goal is still the same. You're focusing on water quality, focusing on economic factors, and the total points still add up to 100, and the points awarded per category don't change.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
If you've got your major contaminant,
Mm-hmm.
arsenic, for example,
Certainly.
would you get the points for the minor contaminant also?
If both were present, yes.
In other words, minor contaminant is something,
Other than arsenic.
okay.
Arsenic's
Like
considered a
sodium.
major contaminant.
Okay, all right.
So looking at the water quality information, again, we'd be requiring the well testing, but we'd be adjusting these scoring ranges. So since we're requiring it, it kind of makes sense to expand that percentage rather than going from 0 to 25, go from 0 to 50. And then we can parse that out in 10 percentile increments. We're really setting a floor for both the major contaminant and the minor contaminant as far as points you can earn. So even if you have just one well, and you've got 100 people in the application, you're still going to earn 15 points. And then from there, it's a 2-point increment up to the maximum of 25 for the major. Same thing for the minor. You're just starting at 5 and going at 2-point increments up to the max of 15.
John,
Yes, sir.
I understand your methodology there, but if it's got a certain rate of arsenic, should that not just make it a slam dunk? I mean, if the water's unsafe to drink, unsafe to bathe in, I realize we got to look at the customers per mile, the applicants, but I know, is it manganese that also is a minor?
Yeah, manganese is another common contaminant that,
Yeah,
that
but
we
it's a
would run
minor,
into.
not a major, right? Or is it?
Yeah, that's a minor.
Yeah. What I'm saying is arsenic's the bad thing. So why do we give it as little? I mean, I don't think have they said manganese is it's not good, but it's not deadly, is it?
Well, manganese is considered a minor contaminant. Arsenic is considered a major contaminant. So in the overall scheme of things, we've got major contaminants, you have a maximum total points of 25. With minor contaminants, it's a maximum of 15. So we're trying to make that distinction between the two categories to begin with.
Well, I'm just trying to improve this as we change.
Understood. The other thing I'd point out here, and this may address your concern a little bit, is we saw a lot of score compression. So we saw a lot of projects receiving the same score. So by spreading out the scoring ranges in those 10% increments, what we're doing is we're encouraging diversity in the scoring and rewarding those projects that have more issues with well water quality than those that don't.
And I've had several people, not a lot, but I've had several people tell me they don't feel like they should have to have their well tested. They don't feel like they should have to apply for water. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with their thinking, but I can't believe that people are drinking off of a well and won't have it tested. When they, I mean, I agree. They've got to have it tested, but I don't know how we can make them. Or we can't. I don't want to, but.
Understand, we're presenting this information so that y'all can make an informed decision. The recommendation by staff to require well testing is really to cover that gap that we saw, because we receive virtually no water quality information. And if the intent of our program is to address those health issues, we need to know that information to make those decisions appropriately.
Could you have a customer service person dedicated to just this that could help educate them? I mean, I know that's the expense, but.
Well, we do have administrative staff that help us with the intake of applications and compiling of information. So, I mean, Alina Young is here with us. She's our project manager for the Shortline program, so she fields questions and comments about this almost on a daily basis.
I'm just asking, some of these people, if you could explain it to them adequately, it seems like to me, they would understand why they need to have it tested.
Well, I'll get to that with our timeline which is
Okay.
towards the end of the presentation.
All right.
So looking at what this might do to scoring. So keep in mind that we didn't have any water quality information as part of the FY22 program, but we wanted to show how this might impact scores. So if you assume that this random sampling of 5 projects from the FY22 applicants, if you assume that one well had a major contaminant, what would that do to the scoring? Well, it resulted in an increase in the score of anywhere from 17 to 25 points. So it has a measurable impact. Same thing with the minor contaminant. You can see that we had nothing in FY22. If one of these wells had a minor contaminant, it would impact the scoring, but raising it anywhere from 7 to 15 points. So when we're talking about water quantity or well yield, again, this is very similar to what we're doing with the water quality information. Is that range would go from 0 to 50%. We're setting that floor of points that you would earn at 10. And then it's a two-point increment up to the maximum of 20.
How are you going to verify that?
They would have to submit well testing information. So we would need to understand what the yield rate was.
I think that's going to be hard.
So that covers kind of the water quality and the water quantity items in the scoring metric. This next part here will deal with the economic factors. So the first thing is density. So we wanted to change the title from potential customers per mile to customer density. Just for point of clarification, it makes it less confusing for folks, especially when you're talking about projects that are less than a mile in length. So if you have one applicant and they're at the end of the project length is 0.2 of a mile, the calculation yields 5 customers per mile, but there's only one applicant, so there's a bit of a disconnect there. Still using the same calculation metric, it's just clearer in the title. And again, here, all we're doing is adjusting the scoring ranges. So rather than the 5-point ranges that we had in FY22, we're going to a 3-point increment. And again, this is to drive some diversity into the project scoring. So it's to avoid that score compression that we were seeing.
Well, is density going to make it possibly more than a mile, or?
The overall approach to the scoring doesn't change at all. The only difference is we are changing the scoring range. So we're still going from 10 to 30, FY22 is 10 to 30, FY23 is 10 to 30. We're just breaking down the scoring ranges in 3-point increments rather than 5.
Per mile gives you a definite 5,280 feet.
Yes.
Density is a big question mark.
Well, it's just the number of potential connections along the frontage of that line.
Okay.
So looking at what this would do, scoring-wise, you can see in the FY22 column there, we had a couple of 5s, a couple of 10s, and a 15. This changes the scoring up to 6s, 12s, and 15s. So we're, again, trying to promote some diversity in that scoring. Our cost per applicant calculation, this one's a little bit trickier because we're changing the actual ranges. In FY22, we had between 10 and 30,000 as the breakdown. Based on what we saw, we're recommending that range go from 40,000 to 100,000. And we didn't just pick the number out of a hat. Our average cost per applicant for the recommended projects from FY22 was about $65,000. So you can see in the metrics here, that's smack in the middle of the range. So we took that as the midpoint and went up and down from that. And again, it's more discrete scoring. It's a 1-point increment rather than a 1 or 2-point increment as we had before. So what would this do to the scoring? If you look at FY22, everybody scored a 1 out of our sampling of projects. This just promotes that diversity in scoring. So instead of everybody scoring 1, you've got 1s, 2s, 3s, and a 4. So our participation rate, I touched on this earlier. In FY22, we had this broken down into ranges. Less than 25% was 0, up to 75% where you would earn 15. What we're proposing is just whatever participation rate the project yields, you multiply that by the number of points, and that's what you get. So if your participation rate is 10%, you get 1.5 points. Looking at what this would do to the scoring ranges, you can see here we had either a 0 or a 5 for this random sampling of projects. This would allow greater diversity in that scoring, so it's ranging from 1 up to about 7. So again, trying to spread those projects out and make it easier to distinguish which projects we should be selecting. System benefit, there's no change. Like I said before, this is a binary decision. It either has a benefit or it doesn't. And then looking at the overall impact of all of these changes, looking at the scoring from FY22 to FY23, all of these projects landed in that 16 score bucket. If you were to apply all these scoring changes and assume a major and minor contaminant, you would shift that scoring between on an average of about 35, 36 points, and those scores would range anywhere from 45 up to about 58. So important to note here, we just assumed that there would be one well in each of these projects that had a major contaminant and a minor contaminant. If you remove all of that, you're still changing the scores from 16s. They would change from 16 to either 20, 17, 22, 21, something like that. So you're still diversifying that score. So we're still achieving that goal that we were trying to get to by adjusting the scoring ranges. And I do want to touch on the program cost share, because this is calculated based on the number of points earned for customer density and participation rate. So since we changed those metrics, that's necessarily going to impact how the cost share is calculated. A couple of key points here. The meter fee has been updated. So as you recall, we had a 2-year increase in that base cost. It was $87.50 a year. Our system development fee is unchanged, so that's still sitting at $3,200. And the cost share fee is unchanged, so that still ranges from $750 up to $3,000. But as you can see, we went from $272.50 for the meter up to $360, and that's just the second year increase. The cost share fee is a graduated scale based on points earned. So if you have less than 10, it's 3,000, 10 to 15, 2250, 16 to 20, it's 1,500. Greater than 20, it's the minimum charge of $750.
Now, John, a house built before 2018 wouldn't pay a system development fee, would they?
No, they would not, and that's on the next slide.
Okay.
So looking at this, trying to bookend this for you, just so you understand the minimum and maximum costs that would be associated with it. So constructed pre-2018, no system development fee changes. In FY22, the total would have been $1,022.50. For FY23, you're just seeing that $87.50 change in the meter cost, so it would bump up to $11.10. If you were constructed after 2018, then it would go to $42.22.50 in FY22, and that would increase to the $43.10 you see there. If you look at the other side of this, at the maximum, again, the only difference here is the meter fee. So you're going from $32.72.50 up to $33.60. If the system development fee were to apply for a house constructed post-June of 2018, then you would be going from $64.72.50 up to $65.60. So looking at how these scoring changes would impact our sampling of projects, all of these projects fell at the $22.50 mark for their cost share. Looking at where they fell with these changes, they're largely the same. You've got 3 that remain the same, 2 actually dropped. But the takeaway here is that there should be a negligible impact to where people fall in this cost share metric. If anything, it should be an improvement because you're given the opportunity to score some points based on participation, regardless of what that participation rate is. So you're always going to earn something. Oops. So our program timeline, we would be looking to start communicating out on the program in July of 2020, and this would be through print and electronic media as well as direct mailings, very similar to what we did last year. Based on the response that we got to the program, our communications effort, it indicated that our communications effort was successful. We got a lot of interest in it. The application period would be open for 90 days, and that would run from August 1 to October 31st. And you could apply either electronically online, or you could pick up a paper application, print it off, fill it out, drop it off, mail it in, what have you. The things we want to emphasize are, 1, that we would be requiring well testing. Number 2, participation. We want people to engage their neighbors. Number 3, we want to make sure everybody's aware of the deadlines. So please submit your application within that window. And then last but not least, make sure the application's complete. To the best of your ability. So get your neighbors engaged, make sure everybody's name gets on the application, make sure your well testing information gets sent in with the application as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir, Commissioner
a couple
Hill.
of questions.
Yes, sir.
The well testing requirements, you're not going to even consider the application without a well testing requirement? Well testing?
Well, there would be an exception. If you have a building permit but you don't have a well installed, obviously we can't get well information. So they wouldn't earn any points for it, but the application would still be considered.
Okay. Because this is serious. People don't understand. I'm in the middle of it right now. The health department told me I cannot get my CO because I had 7 times the acceptable arsenic level. Unless I put the water filtration in.
Okay.
So it's serious. And, you know, Commissioner Rape's comment about people refusing to have their well tested. What does the well test cost if they go through the county?
So if someone were to come through environmental health, they would have to have 2 tests done, and that would be the bacteriological panel and the inorganic panel. My understanding is that cost is around $200 total, and typically results would be back within 2 to 6 weeks.
And that's what I experienced. Bacteria came back perfect, safe to drink, but when the other came back, it's not no heck no, you know. So it's a serious thing we've got to consider. The other concern I have is that there are people with wells that can't afford these fees. with the cost share. So I'm making an assumption that you're asking the board to approve these. The program is a board program. It started as a board program, so any changes the board has to approve would be my understanding.
That is correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think there's one thing worth sort of expanding on, providing you a little bit more detail on. When John says that it takes, 2 to 6 weeks to do a well test, what does that mean, John, if I can just pose it to you as a question, for the application period ending October 31st? If I told you on October 30th when I handed my application that I've submitted a request to have my well tested, is that sufficient, or do they actually have to have the well results?
No, they would need to have the well results back and submitted with the application.
So just for your clarity, so they would need to submit early on, have the well results back to submit with the application by October 31st. Simply saying, I've submitted, to Department of Health to have my well tested is not sufficient in terms of fulfilling the requirements of the application, at least as we're proposing.
In 3 weeks, I got both tests back.
Well,
So that's.
within that 2 to 6 week window, which has been your experience as well, that's well within the 90 days
Yeah.
that we have open. But it doesn't give people a lot of time, necessarily. They can't wait until the 11th hour. They do have to be
Agreed.
proactive about it and request that their well be tested roughly within the first month, just to make sure.
David, Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The county well test, does that also include the quantity test?
Not that I am aware of, no.
So last year, we obviously got very little submitted in terms of well yield testing. What we would accept is typically when they test a well, there's going to be a tag on the well, and if it comes back when it was originally installed and it was less than 2 gallons a minute, we would allow folks, provide us with that document, provide us with a picture certifying that you have a well less than 2 gallons a minute. If it tested when you first installed it, let's say you got 5 gallons a minute, but due to demand around you, it's now going dry, at that point, we would say you have to have a certified well driller come out and perform a new test to verify what your current yield rate is.
But we're not requiring that. We're requiring the water
Quality
quality, but
testing.
not the well yield.
Okay. And another kind of follow-up question, in terms of the water quality, is there a range of time from which they can produce a test? I mean, is something within the last 3 years or 5 years, or?
We
I mean,
do
is-
not have a sunset on well test information. So if somebody's got water quality information and it's 5 years old, great, we'll take it. If they have water quality information and it's 2 days old, great, we'll take it.
Okay.
So there is no
No sunset.
expiration date on that.
Okay, great.
What about commercial testing?
Pardon me?
In commercial testing? Because they're available, there are people who test your water that's outside the government.
Certainly.
If it's a
Any-
qualified,
Any test that comes back from a qualified lab that identifies both bacteriological and the inorganic compounds, we can utilize. So it does not have to be through Union County Department of Health.
Thomas, when you were talking about the tag on the well,
Yes, sir.
what's going to be real important is the depth of the well, too. A 6-inch well holds 1.5 gallons per foot. And how far is it standing from the surface? Most of them are 20 feet below surface. If a well's 400 feet, if the pump is near the bottom, they've got 600 gallons in that column. So, and I don't think they'll be able to afford to pay a well drilling company to come out there, because it'll cost a lot. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? If it's, now on that tag is not the location of the pump, but if you've got a 400-foot well, it stands 20 feet from the surface, you've got 380 foot of column water times 1.5 gallons a minute, that will run most houses. if the pump's slow enough. So, and 2 gallons a minute is 120 gallons an hour. And I'm just saying, that's why I said it earlier, that quantity scoring is going to be all over the place, and it may not be accurate.
Right, and we may not get that information, but again, we're not requiring that yield data. So if somebody can demonstrate it, great, but it's not a requirement. We're trying to address the contaminant issues is what we're requiring.
I'm just saying, I think that's confusing there, you know. I realize the quantity doesn't have, well, it's, how many points does it have?
The quantity is 20 points.
That's a lot of points.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So what we're asking for y'all to do this evening is, one, approve the scoring changes, and then number 2, approve the open application period beginning August 1 and then closing October 31st.
John, if a newer, better mousetrap comes out in 2 months from y'all, there would be no problem with changing the score criteria, would they? I mean,
Well-
if something more revealing, I'm not talking about,
Well, as I mentioned, we're going to need to communicate this out in July. So whatever criteria we're going to be evaluating these projects on needs to be very clear, and we would not be able to change that for this
This year.
year. Now, year over year, are we going to look at the data that we get and see what works and what doesn't? Absolutely. That's what we did this year, which is what is informing these changes. So if what we're asking for this year, maybe if it's not quite the right fit, then we're going to tweak it again next year with some other recommendations.
another thing the county offers is on property tax for people over 65, if their adjusted gross income is 33,000, the property tax on their main house is half. Do we need, Commissioner Hibbs talked about some people couldn't pay this. Do we need to set up something for people that are barely getting by? If they can prove their AGI is under low to moderate income? I mean, that's something to think about too.
Well, as I mentioned before, the fee structure or the cost share was brought before y'all, and that's approved on an annual basis. So that's really at your all's discretion as to how that's done. Staff put forward the recommendation of that sliding scale based on the 2 economic factors and the points earned there in order to put people in those categories.
The county manager was going to say something.
Mr. Chairman, appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments. Spent quite a bit of time with public works staff reviewing these scoring criteria. And to speak to the well testing, you know, as we begin to look at the data that we have collected since this short line program began in its current modified state, you know, this will be the 4th year, right? This will be the 4th year of the short line program.
Yes.
Yeah. So 4th year, this will be the 2nd year using these criteria. You know, one of the stated objectives is to address these contaminated water wells, bad water. And these are some significant dollars that we're talking about running these water lines to individual users. I don't think, and please don't take this the wrong way, but I don't think it's too much to ask that this well test be completed as part of the application process. So we currently have a map that identifies wells with bad water, that the data used to populate that map has been one that has been provided using information through environmental health. Now, if the cost of a well test is $200 and there's 124 projects in the FY22 program, then we're talking about $24,800. I think the value of getting that data, knowing exactly where the wells are located, the level of contamination of the wells, is paramount to the purpose of this program. Now, $24,800 is certainly not a small sum, but perhaps it is one that could be absorbed within, say, a public works operational budget in terms of, and I'm going to throw this out there, it has not been discussed with staff, I haven't discussed it with anybody else because I just thought about it sitting here, is that require the well test, but then reimburse those applicants for that $200 test when we get the test results. They pay for it up front, and we reimburse them when we get the results. That way, it's no cost impact in terms of the testing, but you have verifiable data to go off of both now and in the future. It is critical to this program and programs like this as we move forward and address these issues that we have good, viable data, and we're just not getting it the way the system is set up right now. So those would be my comments. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
All right. Another thing, I don't think a lot of people don't realize how much the county's spending on this short line per applicant. I tell them around $50,000 per tap. And I think that's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, the FY22 projects, the average cost per applicant was just over $65,000.
And that's a lot of money. I mean,
Well, it's a noble, but it's not an inexpensive endeavor.
all right, let's have some discussion. Commissioner Simpson.
With regard to what you're requesting from us to approve staff changes, or system changes, what was the exact word? Scoring changes.
Scoring changes,
Sorry.
sir.
Does that include requiring a well test? Is that a part of that?
Yes,
Is
sir.
that? Okay, so I don't recall that we've approved that.
Sir.
I said, I don't recall that the board has approved, right, that
Yes.
we've approved that it has to be required.
That is correct.
Right.
We would be asking you to approve the well test be required and implement the scoring changes as presented.
That's
this
what I
evening.
want to clarify on the requiring the well test.
Yes, sir.
I certainly concur with the manager's comments in that the cost of the test is insignificant in what we're paying for this system. And, even, I appreciate the paying for it up front, all of that, whatever we can work out. But even if we had to pay it before we would approve that extension, it'd be a small price to pay for having that kind of data. Young, you nodding your head over there that that's not true, or?
No, it's not that, it's, well, I'm just trying to think, because all you're seeing in the 124, the applicants, are the applicants that got approved. I was just thinking that in addition to the 124, we'd have to do the well testing on all the applicants that didn't make it into the final sort of list of applicants, so.
Well, as I understood it, as I heard it, you bring a test with your application.
Well, yes.
So
That is-
means
that is
everybody that
correct.
applies is
So-
going to test. You're going to test.
Just to be perfectly clear, those are 124 projects. Within those projects, there are various numbers of applicants. So an individual, an applicant, so if you had an application that had 10 folks on it, we would have 10 well tests that would go with that.
How many applications did we take this last year?
We received 350 there were 350 applicants.
350.
My point being is, I don't think it's too much to ask that when you apply, you have a well test.
$70,000.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
just,
I concur with that.
that's what it's all
I
about.
think it's important.
Well, would there be any discussion about what the manager said, having them to pay for it? And then, once they submit the sample, did you recommend?
We could do whatever the board's pleasure is. I think, you know, whether we give them the well testing packet, sampling packet, or have environmental health go out and take the sample, but cover it, whether we cover that cost up front or reimburse them on the back end. The value of that data going forward is imperative. Even and consider this, please, even if the project is not accepted, you still have the well testing data for that well. So that helps develop your map. It updates the quality of the information that we have across the county. And again, $65,000 a tap is not an insignificant cost. I think we need to be collecting all the data that helps make those decisions both now and in the future.
Any discussion on adding that to the motion of approving this new scoring system, Commissioner?
My question is, scoring changes is one thing, the cost sharing, are you including cost sharing and scoring changes? Because they're two different entities.
The cost share, that rubric has not changed.
And I didn't ask you that. Are you expecting when I vote for scoring changes, that the cost share is automatically approved with it if that gets passed?
So the cost share was approved as part of last year's program. Since there were no changes proposed, it would remain unless otherwise directed. Staff are not recommending any changes to it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that we approve the scoring changes, but eliminate the cost sharing for further evaluation.
Well, somebody give me some advice, huh? What's this gonna do to?
So, Commissioner Helms, just to reiterate, so we want to start communicating this out in July for that open application period in August. So as part of that, we need to understand what that cost share is. So we would not be able to communicate out the program until that is resolved, whether there is a cost share or no cost share or something in between.
We've got a meeting in July?
One meeting.
Yeah, I don't realize that.
Now, if you went back to the cost share, Stoney, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just doing the math, I think, how many wells do we have in Union County right now? The last number I've heard was about 25,000 people that were not on county water, and that was about 4 years ago. What kind of numbers are we looking at?
I do not know the total number of wells.
That's not data that we keep within the utility, that's public health information. We can
So maybe we could get that number. I mean, if we've got 25,000 wells on business and churches, homes. That's $5 million. I know that Todd Johnson is looking at money from the state for some, different things, and he was talking about with me this morning with it. Maybe it's a possibility we just do every well in the county, get that map that we need, maybe use some state funding, some grant funding to do that with, be done with it, back to whether we reimburse people or just do it. Maybe that's the information that we need before we make decisions in the future on all these programs. So there's money maybe available, and I just don't know the legalities of telling everybody we're going to test their well, whether we could require it or not. Some people, like I said, may not want their well tested, but if it gives us a good roadmap of where we need to go, what we need to do in the future, it might be worth the expenditure. And as far as this, I'm willing to approve whatever changes you need to do for this year's program to get it moving. But we do need to look at, where we can roadmap these wells in the county and see what we're actually looking at.
Ms. Lancaster, could ARPA money be used for the testing?
I'm not sure sitting here right now. I'd have to look into that.
Mr. Chairman, we could find that out by the next meeting and let them proceed with the scoring.
Would you go back to the cost share? I thought that had been pretty well worked out, Richard. The cost share goes down the more participants. You see it there?
Yeah, I'm aware of it.
I mean, and that's per mile too, isn't it? These old cost shares are per mile.
Yes,
That's why I said going to density instead of per mile.
well, the customer density and the participation rate are what drive the point total, which determines where you fall in that cost share. So the more points you have, the lower your cost is.
Well, I will ask the board members, what's your pleasure? What do you want to do? Commissioner Sampson?
I move that we approve the scoring changes, including the requirement for well testing, and also approve the application period August 1st through October 31st, 2022, with the request that the manager look into the best method of whether they pay up front, county subsidized, whatever that might be. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, you've got a motion on the floor right now, so you need to address that
Sorry.
first.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I'll withdraw my motion. I agree with Commissioner Simpson.
Okay. Commissioner Rushing, I believe you said you was good with it. Commissioner Williams?
I support that motion as well. I would just ask Commissioner Simpson if he would accept a friendly amendment just to go ahead and make it a reimbursement program for the 200 for the well testing fee.
Absolutely.
I think applicants will be inclined to be a bit more serious with that if they pay up front and then know they can get reimbursed. I also want to say that I think Commissioner Rushing's idea is a good one about exploring longer term, perhaps with the state, how we might get some funding for more broad-based well testing. Of course, there are issues of consent there we'd have to explore, but I do support that motion and would just offer that as a friendly amendment if you accept it on the reimbursement.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion with an amendment. The motion is to adopt the Shortline Water Extension Program ranking criteria, cost share, and program open application start date and duration, with the amendment that applicants will pay environmental health for the testing of their wells, $200. And then after the results are submitted, they will be reimbursed from it. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just for clarification, did we make a decision on the fact that the well testing had to be done? That had to be a part of the application? Not after the fact? Is that understood?
Yes, that was my understanding.
Okay, good. Just clarification.
Well, do we need to make a motion since it wasn't spelled out in this motion?
I think if staff understood it that way, we're good to go.
Thank you for that clarification.
All right. Thank you all for the time this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You got 10 minutes left. You want to say anything else?
It's a rare night when I finish early.
Okay.
No, thank you again for the time.
All right, I move to adjourn the special meeting. All in favor?
You know, we talked